Let's get to the starts and sits, Fabs. Starting with the quarterbacks. Who are we starting?
Let's do it, my friend. And we are starting, Kyler Murray. Last week, bit of a disappointment, was held to fewer than 15 points against Detroit. I really liked him. I thought he would be better. But now he's got the Commanders. I mean, listen, Lindsay Rhodes is playing against the Commanders. I'm starting her at quarterback. They're awful. Do that. You may throw for 250 and 2. You may surprise yourself.
That's the one where it tilts.
I have Kyler Murray as my QB2 this week. So that tells you how much I like him.
Yeah.
So some folks who maybe wanted some validation after last week was not great, start him.
Will they punt? Will they punt?
And then Joe Burrow against the Panthers had a very good game last week. We saw that. It was a great game against Washington, scoring over 25 points in that game. He's thrown 5 touchdowns and no picks in his last 2 games. He's got T. Higgins back. The Panthers have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So Joe Burrow is back in my top 10.
All right. Who's not? Who is sitting?
One you're
this is not just a faller in the rankings. We're literally thinking about putting this person on the bench. Who is it?
And one you're going to be mad at. Anthony Richardson. Listen, he's been brutal the last 2 weeks. 15 combined fantasy points. He's not running the football. He's not making good decisions. He's had 6 interceptions in his first 3 games. The Steelers have allowed the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, so their defense is legit. We know that. So Richardson's a risk this week. And I think Sam Darnold's a risk too. And I have been getting questions about Sam Darnold on X. Like, guys, I mean, listen, he's not Brett Favre all of a sudden. I mean, like, he's had a couple of good games in a row. Great. He's not a must-start quarterback. Okay. And listen, he's been good. The last 2 games, he's averaging 21.6 points. Good. Great for him. And I hope he continues to do it because I have Justin Jefferson and eventually TJ Hawkins and chairs all over the place. But Green Bay's averaged fewer than 14 points per game to quarterbacks this season. It's a home game for the Cheeseheads at Lambeau Field. So I would just say that Sam Darnold, obviously a starter in Superflex, but if you're in a 1 quarterback league, I would temper your expectations.
All right, let's go to running backs. I feel like I'm going to need to gather some data here so I can fight back against that Sam Darnold take, but I'm not going to do it at this very moment. What about our running backs? Who are we starting?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Tony Pollard. And we all liked them last week and he didn't do anything. But a lot of that was game script. I mean, the Titans just got blown out of the water by Green Bay, which is crazy because Malik Willis was starting quarterback. But now he's got a roadie against the Dolphins. They've given up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs this year. So Pollard's a nice RB2. And so is Brian Robinson Jr. We talked about Austin Eckler being out with the concussion. And Robinson has averaged 14.4 points in his first 3 games. And the Cardinals have allowed the most fantasy points to running backs on their home field of any defense dating back to last season. We saw what David Montgomery did to them last week. Brian Robinson is a really good play this weekend.
What about the sits? Who are we sitting here?
Yeah, sit them, beware, etc., depending on what your roster build is. But Rachaad White it's been bad. 11.8 points in his last 2 games. We know Bucky Irvin is getting more touches. White's averaging 2.1 yards per rush. He's 5th from last among running backs in terms of rushing yards over expected. It's brutal. Eagles this week. So I'd beware Rachaad White and I'd beware J.K. Dobbins too. Here's the good news. He led the Chargers backfield in snaps and touches last week. He still did nothing. He had 8.4 points. Now he's got Kansas City. We don't know who the quarterback of the Chargers is going to be. It might be Taylor Heineke. They might be playing from behind. Negative game script takes him out of the game. And by the way, the Chiefs defense, 3rd fewest points to home running backs since the start of last season. So J.K. Dobbins is a risk this weekend.
Can you imagine if it's not Herbert, what the stacked box rates would look like there?
Yeah.
For JK.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty high. Yeah.
I mean, against this particular Chargers team that has been like, we're going to run it. And we are not going to get any wide receivers. That's how strongly we feel about this. Like, woo, that could be gross. Can I add one quick start for running back that we didn't mention there? How about Zach Moss versus Carolina, a guy that you might not otherwise think? Panthers allowed 131 rushing yards to J.K. Dobbins and a 7.7 yards per pop. Interesting coming off the J.K. Dobbins. This is one of his good games. They gave up 83 rushing and 27 receiving to Alvin Kamara. 5.5 a pop. Obviously, Zamir and the Raiders have problems and they couldn't get it done against Carolina, but Carolina is a plus matchup of all plus matchups. And so Zach Moss is a playable asset this week. I would put him in. Who are we starting at wide receiver?
Jackson Smith and Jigba. And you may be like, wait a minute, Fabs. He's been bad 2 of the first 3 weeks. And that's the truth. But look at the matchup this week. He's been running about 80% of his routes inside. The Lions have gotten smoked by slot receivers. They've given up the third most fantasy points. And I know it was Cooper Kupp and Chris Godwin, but this is a kid that I think is going to start to emerge as a more reliable option from a fantasy perspective. And if you have AJ Brown, or if you have Cooper Kupp or another wide receiver who's hurt, you got Debo, you could plug him in this week. And I think you can plug in Khalil Shakir too, because he's emerged as the number one option in the passing game at wide receiver for Josh Allen. He's averaging 14.3 points per game. The Ravens defense has given up the fifth most fantasy points to wide receivers, and that includes giving up good games to Jalen Tolbert and Kavonte Turpin last week. So keep that in mind. Shakir is a nice flex option.
We're sitting
Jalen Waddle, and it breaks my heart. It hurts me. I can't play him. Unless I'm desperate, and I'm in a league where it's like 14 teams and I kind of have to, I'm stuck with them. But guys, Miami's offense is awful right now. Like everyone, I remember how we talked about in the rankings where I had Tyreek ranked in like the mid-teens. I dropped him today. I dropped him out of the top 20. And I hope I'm wrong, but the Titans are good against perimeter receivers. At least they have been. And the Dolphins quarterback, no matter who it is not going to be good because it's not Tua. So Jalen Waddle is a fade, and so is Michael Pittman Jr.
Yeah.
And I loved him last year. He was very reliable, had his best fantasy season, but Anthony Richardson's lack of, let's just say, good decision-making, lack of accuracy has really hurt him. And Richardson's only wide receiver who's done anything this year has been Alec Pierce, and that's been on what, Linz? Like deep throws, right?
Yep.
In the vertical pass attack. Michael Pittman's just not seeing enough good targets in on the gridiron right now to be a startable asset, and he's playing the Steelers this week. So that makes it a double negative for me.
You have Anthony Richardson on your big bang up number one in the entire tournament Scott Fishbowl team. And I did notice that you made a certain waiver wire ad this week that I have been talking about on this podcast.
Oh, no, I drafted Joe Flacco. He's been on my team since like the draft. I drafted him.
I really wanted to give myself credit for that.
No, I drafted him. Because Anthony Richardson's not durable. Flacco was really good at the end of last year. But you know what that means?
What?
We are on the same wavelength, my friend.
I guess, except, yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you don't have to use him. I'm afraid you might. So many ways to play fantasy football. Like daily fantasy sports is another way. If your, redraft leagues are not doing so great and you want to get in on the action some other way, are you one of the over 5 million active members on Prize Picks, which is the number one daily fantasy sports app in America, Michael Fabiano? It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is take 2 to 6 players, look at their stat projections, decide whether or not you think they're going to score more or less on any given. Maybe it's receptions, maybe it's yards, whatever it is. And then just watch the winnings roll in. Jen Piacenti joins us every Wednesday and Friday. She gives us a few different people whose numbers she likes. Maybe you could have taken her advice about Greg Dortch last week, which was his receiving number was like around 29.5. If you had gone more, that would have hit. And so there you go. Yep. They're giving you one, Fabs, just like a free square.
I know. Yeah, that's it. Caleb Williams passing yards. All he has to do is get one on Prize Picks. And that is every week in September. Just so you know, you guys know I'm not a big fan of Caleb Williams in fantasy, but he did have 363 of those yards.
That's more than
week.
one.
So they are giving you a little bit of a layup here over at Prize Picks because they want you to join the platform and they want you to win. So you get a winner right there with Caleb Williams right off the bat.
So that's one. If you get as few as 4 correct picks, you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks. So download the Prize Picks app today and use the code FANTASYDIRT. You'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. That is code FANTASYDIRT on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. That is Prize Picks. Run your game. Okay, tight ends. Who are we starting?
This one's low-hanging fruit because it's all I got, kids. It's all I've had Dalton Kincaid. And honestly, he's only had one good game this year. He had 13.1 points against the Jags in that just destruction of Jacksonville. But now he's got Baltimore, and you may be thinking, well, tough matchup. Well, they've actually allowed the second most PPR points at tight ends this year. Jake Ferguson had a big game against them last week. So I'm going to start Kincaid, and I'm going to start Cole Kmet, but I would also keep an eye on the status of Keenan Allen because that could change things. But the bottom line here is that Cole Kmet has seen his snaps go up and his targets go up. He had a massive game last week. I ain't expecting 26, but right now I'm hoping for like 8 to 10 from a tight end. And the Rams defense, not good against tight ends, even dating back to last year.
Well,
so if
not
you
good
are
at
in
anything.
need, Cole Kmet could be on the waiver wire. Pick him up and start him. We talked about it at the top of the show. There's a lot of good tight ends. Well, at least tight ends we thought were good, who are either hurt or struggling right now.
Like Mark Andrews with his
Mhm.
30% route participation last week.
It's bad.
I'll just be over here crying. Tell me, who else am I sitting?
So both of these players are dinged up a little bit, but they're expected to go. Hunter Henry is dealing with an ankle. He's had 2 bad games in 3 weeks. And last week we saw him actually lose snaps to Austin Hooper, which is a problem. And now he's got the Niners. They've given up the 6th fewest fantasy points at tight ends dating back to last year. I am looking forward to not having to look back to last year because now we're going to be 4 weeks in. And so we've got a little bit more data that we can utilize. But at the end of the day here, the only saving grace for Hunter Henry is that the Patriots get into a game script where they have to throw. And that's very possible. But then again, it's also Jacoby Brissett throwing them passes. So that's not good. And then Dalton Schultz, much like Henry, he's been seeing a full complement of snaps, but he's only been targeted 11 times. That's it. And he's averaging 3.9 points per game. And the Jaguars have allowed single-digit points to all but 6 tight ends to start of last season. So they actually haven't been bad against the tight end position overall. I know they gave up a good game to Kincaid last week, but that was just an absolute whitewashing. I would fade Dalton Schultz. And also keep in mind, too, the Texans have Tank Dell. They have Diggs. They have Nico Collins. There's a lot of weapons there. And so Schultz has somewhat been lost in the shuffle.